Super Bowl in the rearview mirror. Congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles. But now everybody's back to 0-0. The offseason officially begins, so we get to talk about salary caps and contracts and free agency and how to rebuild or retool, I guess, this Jacksonville Jaguar roster. With that, let's go to Mike Ginnitti of Spot Track. He is certainly the guy to talk to this time of year, and Mike's always kind enough to join us here on 1010XL. Mike, how we doing, man?
Good, Ryan. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, Mike, we always appreciate it. Busy time for you. Quickly, before we get into the salary cap and what you think the Jaguars may or may not do, the offseason officially begins this week, but it's been a crazy 35 days already for the Jaguars. New head coach, new EVP of football operations, soon to be a new general manager. What's been your thought on everything that's transpired here in Jacksonville?
Wild, for sure, right? I mean, some of the stuff as planned, and I think some decisions had to be forced instead of made, and that's probably a tough way to be starting off this league year, but it seems like the pieces that are falling into place are going to be up to task, at least looking in, and it's going to be aggressive, right? I think that's generally what happens with new regimes that in quite a few places this offseason, but generally the sense is you got to put your foot down, got to put your mark on this roster pretty quickly, and I think from the Jaguars standpoint, at least from what I've been able to look at, that might mean more subtraction than addition this offseason, and I think that might thing for this organization going forward.
Now let's look at the Jaguars first, the salary cap situation. That's the first thing everybody wants to look at. Mike, where are the Jaguars in relation to every other team when it comes to available cap room?
Yeah, about 33 of top 50, top 51 cap space. So that's going to be pretty average to start things off. And quite frankly, they're about 17th on the list right now. So almost exactly average. Plenty of ways to maneuver that, as you probably know. There's plenty of ways to open up or go backwards if the signings start to hit. But it's a good starting spot in terms of where they need for their draft capital and certainly for free agency on March 12th.
So I guess the big question, again, Mike Ginnitti of Spot Track here with us, the big question right off the top is the Christian Kirk question, right? My understanding is the Jaguars go from mid-30s in cap room to upwards of high 40s to low 50s in cap room simply by releasing Christian Kirk. But again, that's easier said than done with how valuable Kirk is to this roster.
$10.5 million of savings to move on from him, but you're right. There's a reason that he was brought in, and I think for the most part he's done his job when healthy, but that healthy part has been a big problem for a lot of the Jaguars situations. So it's probably a scenario, Brian, where you move off this contract and then try to re-sign him similar this offseason. It's a really rough wide receiver market, which, by the way, might be a reason to keep him because, A, he may be overvalued in free agency and not able to be brought back. And it's not a situation you're going to easily replace either via free agency or the draft, knowing what we've seen over the next couple of months here. So it's a tough choice. Again, if the plan is to subtract aggressively and not add aggressively, you're moving on and freeing up the $10.5 million pretty much out of the gate here with Christian Kirk.
Yeah, $10.5 million of savings with Christian Kirk. Again, could you potentially bring him back? That is a question. Mike, I guess the next one would be Evan Engram, right? That's another interesting contract. What's your thought there?
Yeah, you're probably stuck with him for one more year, and that's probably an okay thing. I really liked the signing when it happened. I thought the relationship with Trevor Lawrence was working out well, and quite frankly, the injuries for each of these players kind of staggered their ability to kind of come together. So it's not a move on. Maybe you float him on the trade block and see if you can bulk up some draft assets in the second day or something like that. But I'm keeping him for now versus the $6 million that could be saved by moving on from him.
Trent Baalke, as you probably know, did not make a lot of friends among the Jaguar fan base here. But I will say, Mike, and again, you're the guy to ask, salary cap-wise, contract-wise, I mean, Baalke kind of left the Jaguars in reasonably good standing, did he not?
Reasonably good, but there are some void years that we need to take care of here, right? Which means there's dead cap coming. But for the most part, yes, I think the way things were handled are pretty modern, pretty well done. He's sort of adjusted his approach from his days back in San Francisco when everything was sort of front loaded and he took everything on the chin. So it seems like he was headed in the right direction. There's just a lot of factors that went into place that this current roster isn't working out right now, and they're going to have to clean up some of that mess, unfortunately, to get to the next iteration.
Mike Ginnitti of Spot Track. All right, when you look at the Jaguar free agents, the interesting thing, Mike, is there's just not a lot of guys. I think they only have like 10 or 11 unrestricted free agents and only 2 starters, Brandon Scherff and Andre Cisco. And look, I'm sorry to say this because I like Brandon, but that cap number and his age, I mean, there's no way you bring him back at that rate, correct?
It's not. You're going to take on $13.8 million of dead cap, though, because of the void years. That's one of the big ones I just mentioned here. So it's going to be a little bit of pain just to move on from him. Can you get him back on some sort of renegotiation, some sort of pay cut extension to keep him in the fold, to make sure that the offensive line somewhat stays bolstered? You're certainly going to have to add to that, though. But that also keeps the dead cap spread out a little bit here. So if the play is to sort of rebuild on the fly, he's a player I'm identifying as an early extension candidate at something team friendly because he's 34 going on 35 here. But look, my guess is I'm with you. Most of these 10 free agents are just walking out the door, and it's going to be a fresh batch coming in here in March and April.
As far as the safety market in free agency, we talk about Andre Cisco. It certainly was not a great year for Andre Cisco in 2024. What would be his cap number if they were to bring him back? Where do you think he falls in the market, and how does he relate to the other safeties that are available?
Yeah, the production was somewhat there, right? He's pretty consistent in terms of health and being on the field, and that's more than a lot of these free agent safeties are able to say right out of the gate. So I've got him at about $10 million on a 1-year contract, sort of like a prove-it contract coming off of what has been a fairly successful rookie campaign here. He did get a boost in terms of his last salary, so he's in that market right now to get a decent raise. But I would imagine that he's one of those guys in the mid-tiers right now. So if it ends up being like 2 for 15, 2 for 16, I'm not going to be surprised with that. Most likely you're going to see one of the contending teams identifying him as value going forward over the next couple of months.
As far as the Christian Kirks and Evan Engrams of the world, is there anybody else on the Jaguar roster at a certain salary cap number that you could move into future years or gain more room this year by simply renegotiating? Because we've seen the Jaguars do that a lot in recent years.
Yeah, I would imagine that's on the plate for a few of these players, right? The Walker Littles of the world have a base salary you can move on from here and turn into signing bonus. What are you doing with Travis Etienne's 5th-year option, which is guaranteed? There's something to be said there. But for the most part, I think it's quiet, Ryan, in that regard this offseason. It's going to be more about let's just understand what we have instead of trying to push too much down the road, which is what Baalke's situation was for the past couple of seasons. So maybe 1 or 2 finagles, especially if they're identifying a splashy free agent that they want to account for in terms of salary cap space. But I think they have enough room to walk into March 12th right now and just sort of lay the land out and understand what the landscape's going to be before making too many of those decisions that's going to hurt them in a couple of years.
Let me give you 3 names the Jaguar fans are talking about: Tee Higgins, Javon Holland, and Trevon Moehrig. Yeah. What's your thought on those 3?
Well, I'm thinking defense first. So if the Holland name is the one in the list, that's the top of the name. The problem is that's a top of the market safety in terms of valuation. We've got him right up there in the Antoine Winfields of the world, even though the production's a little bit less. The supply-demand situation for him is going to be huge. So if you're Jacksonville kind of coming in tier 2 of free agency, right? If you've got your contenders and then the tier 2s, you're going to have to overpay for a guy like that, which is something that this team's had to do quite a bit over the past few off seasons. So I think I'm out on Tee Higgins for a lot of reasons with this organization. I'd rather them keep Christian Kirk and try to keep some of these things together and maybe see what a healthy Trevor Lawrence can do with them versus splashy there. But you got to continue to go big defensively and see you figure something out. And I do think a player like Holland is exactly where it belongs.
Final moments, Mike Ginnitti of Spot Track. I hate to say the word stuck, but I'm going to do that. The Jaguars are stuck with Gabe Davis, right?
Yeah, fully guaranteed this year. There's no reason to buy him out. I don't think he's got any trade value because the injuries have sort of been there every single season. Maybe it's something you can package with another player or a pick if you need to do that for some sort of situation. But right now, very little value to keep or to move, and for that, you're just going to have to keep him.
Travon Walker, 3 years in the league. He's now eligible for an extension. Would it be financially justified to do that this offseason or try to get that done?
Look, it's all about how they understand what his value is internally, right? I just had a huge segment on this Philadelphia Eagles situation, right? And one of their superpowers is they know exactly what their players are, and they extend them early and often, and they get cap value because they've done that. So if that's the plan, if this guy's going to be here for 4 more years and you're comfortable guaranteeing 3 of them right now, do it now, get it on the books so that you can make big splashes with more internal players or certainly more external players over the next few off seasons after you sort of understand exactly what holes you have going forward. But if they love him, I'd pay him right now.
Mike, as we begin to wrap up, how would you assess the free agent class as a whole? Positions of strength, positions of weakness?
Yeah, there's quite a few interior offensive linemen that I like in this free agency. I'd say the same for a couple of edge rushers, especially now that we include some trade candidates in that conversation. So those two positions specifically I'm looking at. It's weak otherwise. It's weak running backs. It's weak tight ends. It's weak wide receivers. It's very weak quarterbacks, even with some of these older players falling off rosters here. It's going to be a big year for draft picks. Let's put it that way. So if you've got a player that you know long-term isn't going to be on your roster, I think you're thinking about flipping that player for draft picks right now. And even though it's not a phenomenally great draft, 2026 is set up to be a phenomenally great draft. So you're thinking about probably 2-year windows here with a lot of transactions that happen over the next couple of weeks. And for a team like Jacksonville, that's exactly the mindset is. If we don't think a player is going to be here in 24 months, let's get a 2026 draft pick for him right now and really get ourselves in a situation where we can rebuild this thing over an 18-month process and get ourselves back in division contention.
Mike, final question. The Combine's 2.5 weeks away. Free agency's a month away, and the Jaguars currently do not have a general manager, which that's pretty wild to think about. You've done this for a long time. You're the guy to talk to in this line of work. I mean, how much behind the 8 ball does that put Jacksonville with this whole new league calendar beginning in about a month?
A lot, especially if there are internal players that should be getting contracts right now, and that's sort of not happening, or it's happening with people that shouldn't be making those decisions. I'm concerned about that for sure. But also, the wink-wink conversations that agents will be having at combines and all those things that go into the offseason play. You want to make sure you have somebody established and somebody that agents feel comfortable doing business with, or otherwise you're going to be swinging and missing on a lot of free agents, a lot of opportunities, certainly some trade stuff. You need somebody in there that can be having those conversations with other GMs right now, because I will say this, we have not had a half dozen big-time trade block players like we have right now in any other offseason that I can remember. I think it's going to be a ferocious trade year, and you certainly need somebody in that seat right now, at least answering phone calls.
So you do believe, whether it's Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, guys of that sort could be dealt this offseason?
Yeah, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, there's, aging older players that are going to need a lot of money, unfortunately, but they're happening, and they're happening right now. And we can put some of these, Matthew Stafford's, Derek Carr's. I do think it's going to be a big, big year for at least trade conversations with notable players as some of these teams understand where they are in their iterations.
Hey, Mia here, and thanks so much for watching 1010XL Jaguars. For even more coverage of the Big Cats, be sure to subscribe to 1010XL Jaguars.